Listen up. Recent intel out of Pokrovsk shows this battlefield mutating into something far deadlier than standard frontline combat. We are not just looking at Russian mechanized infantry losing a few transports on a contested supply route. Our analysis reveals a brutal shift. The simple act of moving troops is now a death sentence. Supposedly, secure advance routes have suddenly transformed into absolute kill zones. Rear guard positions that used to feel entirely safe offer zero cover. The terrifying reality of this tactical shift? Once an enemy unit gets spotted, its absolute life expectancy drops to near zero in seconds. This is why this briefing matters. Pokrovsk is no longer just a sector where standard assaults take place. It has become an area where every single phase of transit, recovery, and end, armor protection gets completely shredded before the actual firefight even has a chance to kick off. The critical question is not just what burned at Pokrovsk, but how this rewrites the entire doctrine of modern warfare there. Stick with me here on military force. This escalation is vastly bigger than a few wrecked trucks. The initial strike near Pokrovsk proves that approach vectors to the front lines are now heavily exposed meat grinders. A Russian troop transport was still navigating its advance route when a Ukrainian drone locked onto it from above. That specific tactical detail is crucial. This ambush did not trigger at the trenches or in close quarters combat. The strike hit miles out. The squad was still packed tight inside the armor, completely unable to scatter, take cover, or return fire. In tactical terms, the threat now begins the second tires hit the dirt. In a hot zone like Pokrovsk, where rapid supply chains and fast troop rotations dictate battle momentum, this tactical shift is massive. It turns standard combat deployment into a fatal gamble and applies massive pressure on the supply chain long before the actual ground assault ever materializes. The Russian driver desperately tried to save his armor, hitting the gas and swerving hard from the one incoming threat. But his panic only proved how razor-thin the survival margin is. Hunted by drone units, the driver lost control and dumped the transport into a ditch. That split second defines warfare. The pilot operating the drone did not even need a direct kill on impact to secure a tactical victory. They just had to force a driving error, disrupt the convoy line, and trap the squad completely out in the open. The second that armor hit the dirt, the crew's survival options instantly evaporated. Forward momentum was completely dead, and the steel hull could no longer shield the trapped infantry squad sitting inside. An advance route built to push reinforcements safely forward instantly transformed into an open grave for that entire Russian squad. This brutal reality turns the incoming airstrike into something vastly more punishing than just hitting a truck. The FPV banked hard, locked its sights, and slammed right into the disabled armor. This second strike phase proves the pilot had total control and lethal patience. This was absolutely no random crash or a lucky pot shot caught on camera. It was a calculated, cold-blooded execution of a target already backed into a fatal corner. Command then deployed a secondary drone to hammer the exact same spot until the transport burned to the axles. That double tap strike is exactly what signals a major shift. Ukrainian forces were not just aiming to stall or scare this advancing platoon. The tactical objective was total elimination, stripping the Russian squad of both their heavy armor and their ability to maneuver in one brutal blow. When we look at combat economics, this writes a terrifying new rule of war, where a $500 drone can vaporize heavy armor, shatter battle plans, and neutralize an entire infantry squad before they ever see trenches. The massacre on that Pokrovsk highway proves a massive tactical evolution on the Eastern Front today. When armor gets hunted long before dropping its payload, the firefight does not start at the zero line anymore. It kicks off miles deep in the rear on supply routes. That rewrites the entire strategic concept of frontline troop movement. A standard resupply run is now frontline combat, turning every single dirt path into a kill zone where whole platoons are broken apart early. For the Russian command, simply pushing men into position is getting slower, much harder, and terrifyingly lethal. For Ukraine, drones are executing operations far beyond simply wrecking machines. They are dictating the battlefield before a Russian assault even forms, and trust me, that tactical pressure is only going to escalate. Listen up, because this second vehicle confirmed the pattern. We are no longer looking at just one lucky strike on a single supply road near Pokrovsk. Another Russian transport pushed down that exact same logistics route, and Ukrainian UAVs instantly locked on from above. But here is the critical intel. Finding the target was only step one. They tracked this transport relentlessly, as if the kill zone marked it for total annihilation. This signals absolute tactical control over frontline movement in the sector. In this brutal environment, a supply route is never just a simple path connecting the rear echelons to the zero line. It becomes a heavy surveillance corridor, where one spotted target exposes the rest. Out here, survival is not about speed anymore. It is entirely about whether a unit can move without being tracked. That is exactly where combat dynamics shift. This drone strike was not a one-and-done hit-and-run mission. It hovered, hammering the target repeatedly, keeping maximum pressure on the crew until that transport was totally paralyzed and forced to be abandoned. This relentless pursuit is the vital takeaway from this engagement. Ukrainian forces were not settling for a minor delay. Their tactical objective was absolute destruction, ensuring that logistics transport was permanently erased from the active battlefield. This distinction is massive because a wounded transport can still haul infantry or ammo if it manages to limp away. A dead vehicle blocks the whole route, creating a massive choke point for the rear guard. This strategy crushes response times. Every single second under drone pursuit spikes crew panic, burns critical fuel, kills tactical options, and practically guarantees the operators will ditch their armor before finding hard cover. And that is exactly when the lethal threat spreads beyond the shattered armor. Once the transport was neutralized, we watched Russian infantry attempt to loop back, desperately trying to scavenge supplies or salvage any surviving combat gear. In previous combat eras, that would be a standard recovery operation, but here it was a deadly mistake. Walking back into that kill zone exposed those soldiers to UAVs, still circling high above. This is the most brutal intel from the footage. It proves the engagement did not stop with the armor. The entire perimeter around the flaming wreck became an active strike zone. Tactically speaking, the wreckage became bait. Troops starving for ammo or medical gear had to make a grim choice: abandon their lifelines, or step right into the open crosshairs. That completely shatters any squad attempting to rally. A single drone strike mutates into an ongoing nightmare for the entire advancing battalion. This is why the intense frontline pressure around Pokrovsk is escalating fast. Let's analyze this closely, because the rules of war have changed. Surviving the initial blast absolutely does not mean you are out of the woods. The hunter stays overhead, observing the aftermath of the impact, and targets anyone foolish enough to run rescue. This effectively destroys their ability to medevac casualties, salvage weapons, or reform their lines after contact. This means enemy supply chains are facing layered attacks, hit during deployment, and hit again during recovery operations. Simply put, Ukrainian operators are not just hunting down armored trucks out there. They are deliberately destroying the enemy's core ability to take hits and keep fighting. When that foundation crumbles, we see the strike packages naturally shift toward high-value targets. Hitting those convoys was critical, but hitting the P-18 radar revealed a massive escalation. Our intel shows the assault upgrading from transport columns to the tactical systems, shielding the entire sector. Once Ukrainian drones cleared the supply routes, they locked onto a heavy Russian P-18 surveillance radar and immediately wiped it out. This is major, because command does not deploy assets like that near zero-line combat unless they are desperately needed for immediate operations. A surveillance system like this is a massive, priority target, not just for its multi-million-dollar price tag, but for the defensive umbrella it provides. It identifies incoming threats, tracks low-altitude drones, and relays critical early warnings to battalions with seconds to live. Blinding a system like that changes the combat theater in incredibly lethal, silent ways. Now look closely, because this is where a minor skirmish escalates into a major strategic victory. The P-18 radar is vital. Modern combat completely relies on spotting impending strikes. An army that successfully tracks low-flying bogies actually has a fighting chance to alert anti-air operators, scramble heavy armor, and defend supply routes taking heavy fire. When they blow that radar to pieces, defense reaction times instantly collapse. Bottom line, troops taking fire go blind. They cannot track the skies, and they absolutely cannot shield the dirt under their boots. Let's look at this together. This was not just viral drone footage. It was a surgical kill against the early warning net holding their front line intact. If troop transports are the veins pumping infantry right up to the line, then radar units are the nervous system screaming about incoming threats. Break that nervous system, and every single forward push turns into a deadly gamble. It gets worse for Russian forces. That radar was far from the only high-value asset wiped out that afternoon. A separate Russian air defense battery got completely vaporized, ripping a massive hole in their drone and missile shield. That fact changes the whole picture. These hits were not just lucky shots or random, isolated battlefield casualties. This was a deliberate sequence. One precision hit blinded the enemy, while the second destroyed their heavy counterfire capability. Combined, those twin kills shredded both situational awareness and armor protection simultaneously. That kind of blind spot is lethal anywhere, but especially near Pokrovsk. Out there, relentless Ukrainian drone swarms already force Russian units to run, hide, and resupply under extreme, constant danger. When a military loses its scanners and its armor at the exact same time, the rear staging areas become totally exposed. The next wave of strikes practically plans itself. At that point, a localized tactical failure snowballs into a full system collapse. We also need to talk about the brutal financial reality driving this fight. It tells us exactly how this modern combat theater is rapidly mutating. Intel reports flag that P-18 radar as a scarce, ultra-valuable asset, slapping a price tag of roughly $2 to $3 million right on its chassis. Those same field reports priced the other Russian defense system smoked that day at around $25 million. Ukraine is knocking them out with cheap drones that cost literal pennies by comparison. That financial gap is terrifying. It forces Russian commanders to wager multi-million-dollar hardware against disposable plastics and circuits that are instantly replaced. Given enough time, that stops being a tactical headache. It becomes a crushing strategic burden. Any army survives individual casualties, but repeated, lopsided trades like this violently bleed out confidence, shielding, and logistics, all at the exact same time. Once that defensive dome actually starts fracturing, all the lethal pressure crashes down onto the assault groups trying to maneuver underneath. Look at those two support vehicles getting torched. Ukraine was not just picking off random targets, they were actively sabotaging the Russian assault sequence before it even mobilized. Intel shows those vehicles were pushing up to lay down covering fire for the main assault group dragging behind. Yet, spotter drones caught them completely exposed out on the road. Stick with me here. Heavy fire support is never optional. It is the only thing keeping the next wave of infantry alive so they can blitz the trench fast. So when suicide drones hunted those vehicles down before they could park and shoot, the damage went way beyond burning metal. It violently derailed the exact chronological sequence the Russian commanders had ordered. On the Pokrovsk front, where split-second movement windows dictate whether a bloody offensive takes a trench or dies trying, getting your vanguard fire support blown up instantly paralyzes the entire operation before the foot soldiers even see combat. The real takeaway here is the specific battlefield role those burning rigs were supposed to execute. They were not just random steel rolling down a dirt path. They were the key to a tightly locked assault sequence. Their mission was to hammer Ukrainian bunkers, draw return fire, and buy enough chaos for the trailing infantry to push up without getting slaughtered. The second those vehicles cooked off, the Russian platoon waiting behind them lost way more than just two machines. It lost the absolute backbone of its entire attack structure. With their heavy guns burning, the advancing infantry had to walk into a brutal, completely unshielded killing zone, with their operational timing totally shredded. That permanently alters the entire geometry of this battlefield. A combined arms breach only works if armor, troops, spacing, and suppression fire lock together perfectly in a tiny window. Rip one piece out prematurely, and the rest of the assault force freezes up in sheer panic. And that is exactly when modern warfare brutally executes any unit that fails to keep its assault sequence perfectly intact. So what do we make of this? The real tactical damage cuts way deeper than the explosions caught on camera. Ukrainian kill teams were literally dismantling the Russian offensive before it formed. They struck fast, wiping out heavy armor before the enemy could even stage their forces. They need enough boots, enough firepower, and enough standoff distance to make this assault actually work. Listen to me. This kind of pressure is lethal. It shatters unit cohesion before the main fight even begins. An assault team that should hit as one solid fist starts fracturing into small, isolated targets. These broken formations are far easier to track, easier to isolate, and nearly impossible to reinforce once they take fire. The entire operational tempo collapses. Any unit losing momentum near the zero line has to halt, scramble, and improvise under heavy guns. That breeds hesitation. And hesitation in a sector crawling with hunter drones means you are dead. This is exactly where the carnage starts spreading way beyond the initial blast zones. Right now in Pokrovsk, these strike drones are doing way more than just picking off random vehicles. They are literal battle managers. They help Ukrainian command dictate exactly when a Russian column will collapse and where their forward push will completely fall apart. By slaughtering their logistics trucks early, Ukrainian pilots are actively severing the links between Russian echelons, not just hitting the armor itself. The real kill count is not just burning metal. It is shattered command loops and a totally crippled assault rhythm on the ground. A mechanized push that needs heavy backup now arrives in bloody pieces, and shattered pieces cannot hold ground. Stick with me here, because this makes the Pokrovsk sector totally different from normal artillery duels. Ukrainian forces are not waiting for the enemy to form up. They are violently dismantling the Russian attack while it is still sitting in the staging areas. This sets up an absolute meat grinder for frontline troops forced to advance with zero overhead cover. Bailing out of the armor guarantees nothing, which is the most brutal proof of how much this active combat zone has evolved today. We are watching intercepts where Russian infantry bail out of buggies and transport trucks the very second they hear rotors above them. They scatter into tree lines, fighting holes, or any ditch they can find, hoping distance from the blast zone keeps them alive. In past wars, that tactic saved lives. Not anymore. We are seeing these routed squads hunted down and eliminated on the run. Take note of this shift. The kill zone is no longer confined to the burning BMP or the truck that took the hit. The real threat stalks the infantry long after they bail, meaning their exposure never stops after the first explosion. Every desperate sprint for survival just triggers the next phase of the ambush. This exposes the full kill chain happening right now across the Pokrovsk front. Phase 1. A supply column is spotted. Phase 2. The lead armor is crippled or halted completely. After the hit, drone optics lock onto the surrounding dirt. Finally, the fleeing ground troops are tracked and systematically wiped out. Even if these guys reach a thin wood line or a shallow trench, they never actually find safety. They just trade one exposed kill box for a slightly different one. This is a massive shift in tactical reality, drastically shrinking the combat zone, where any unit can regroup, patch their wounded, or just survive long enough to fight. Once that breathing room vanishes, every single footstep is fatal. That is exactly how drone superiority rewrites human psychology, not just ground tactics. Heavy bomber drones in this sector dial the lethal pressure even higher. They do not just hunt moving targets. These pilots drop heavy ordnance straight into dugouts, wrecked armor, and any surviving clusters of infantry. This proves Ukrainian forces are not just running rogue squads taking lucky, random shots. We are looking at a highly integrated kill web. One recon bird spots the target, and heavy strike platforms move in to erase it. Bottom line here, this goes way past just hitting the obvious targets in the open. It is about maintaining persistent overwatch to slaughter whatever crawls out after the initial blast. A bombed-out tree line or a burning troop transport might buy you 5 seconds, but zero actual safety. You and I have to understand why Pokrovsk is this brutal. The strategic goal here is not just stacking body bags. The objective is to choke off all ammo and fresh troops before they hit the front. When supply routes, muddy ditches, wrecked tanks, and retreating forces are under constant optics, every single muscle movement turns into a death sentence. Listen up, because what you and I are seeing out of Pokrovsk right now is total battlefield control. It hits hard. Looking at the latest tactical reports from the Pokrovsk sector, Ukraine has completely weaponized the airspace. They are not just dropping explosives anymore. These drone swarms are literally dictating the entire geometry of this brutal battle. The kill chain starts before Russian armor even hits gear. It hunts them as infantry scatters into the mud. It pins them down when bleeding survivors scramble for ammo crates, desperately seek cover, or try relying on radar and air defense units parked miles behind them. This completely rewrites how modern warfare operates. When unmanned assets do more than just blow things up when they sever supply lines and shatter offensive timings, and crush the support systems guarding the rear, the total devastation cannot be counted by smoking tanks or blown-out trenches alone. You measure it by how rapidly a military force loses its power to regroup, deploy reinforcements, and maintain forward momentum. Right now, near Pokrovsk. Let's break down what we are seeing together. The front is no longer a traditional line of contact. It is a massive, highly lethal zone of absolute, inescapable exposure. Pushing forward is suicide. Waiting is absolutely fatal. And even a 30-second pause to catch your breath draws a terrifying wave of drone strikes from above. This brutal reality means the fight isn't won by whoever dumps more infantry or armor into the meat grinder. It comes down to which side can actually maneuver without getting wiped out, which units can stay hidden long enough to load weapons, and who can keep a shattered command network running under relentless fire. If this vicious cycle holds up across the Pokrovsk sector, the real question you and I must ask is not how much meat Russia can push forward, but how they can hold any tactical initiative under a sky that rains death. Hit subscribe to Military Force for daily intel.